Welcome. I am Dr. Larry J., a knowledge management expert, and today I want to step into a conversation that most people sense is true, but rarely hear articulated clearly and without fear. We are going to talk about power, about accountability, and about one of the most selectively applied words in the entire vocabulary of international relations, rogue. We hear it constantly. Rogue state, rogue regime, rogue actor. It appears in headlines, in diplomatic statements, in United Nations resolutions. It is used with great confidence and great authority by leaders and institutions that present themselves as the guardians of global order. But I want to ask the question that almost nobody in the room ever asks. Who decided what rogue means? And more importantly, who decided who gets to apply that label freely, consistently, and without any risk of ever having it applied back to themselves? Because that question, that single uncomfortable question, reveals something about the international order that changes how you see almost everything. Here is what we are not saying loudly enough. The same action, the exact same behavior, is called strategy when a powerful nation does it, and called a threat when a smaller or weaker nation does the same thing. Let me be specific, because specificity is where comfortable narratives begin to crack. When a powerful nation stations military forces in dozens of countries around the world, that is called maintaining global stability. When a smaller nation positions forces near its own borders, that is called aggression. When an established nuclear power develops newer, more destructive weapon systems, that is called modernizing national defense. When a nation without nuclear weapons attempts to develop them, that is called an existential threat to world peace. When a wealthy nation imposes economic conditions on others through international institutions, that is called structural reform. When a developing nation resists those conditions, that is called financial irresponsibility or worse. The behavior is not the variable. The power is the variable. And that tells us something critically important about the system we are operating inside. The rules of the international order were not written by everyone sitting at the table. They were written by the nations who built the table, who funded the table, who decided who got a chair and who stood outside. And the rules, with remarkable consistency across decades, tend to protect the interests of the people who wrote them, to legitimize the behavior of the powerful, and to pathologize the resistance of the less powerful. This is not a conspiracy. It is not an exaggeration. It is observable. It is documented. It repeats itself with enough regularity across enough contexts that it can no longer be dismissed as coincidence or isolated exception. When accountability is selective, when the same action produces diplomatic praise for one nation and international sanctions for another, what we are witnessing is not a system of rules. We are witnessing a system of power managing itself, using the language of rules as its cover, and calling that cover rogue when anyone dares to name it. So what does genuine global leadership actually look like? Because I do not want to only diagnose the problem. I want to point toward what integrity in international relations would actually require. It requires accountability that applies to every nation regardless of the size of its economy, the permanence of its seat on the Security Council, or the strength of its military. Not accountability for some. Accountability for all, consistently, without exception. Without the quiet exemptions that currently make the system function as a protection racket for the already powerful. It requires rules that protect the vulnerable first, not rules designed to preserve the advantages of those who were already advantaged when the rules were written. A global order is only legitimate to the degree that its weakest members are protected by it, not exploited through it. It requires leadership that models the behavior it demands of others. You cannot call for nuclear disarmament while expanding your own arsenal. You cannot demand respect for sovereignty while violating it selectively. You cannot lecture the world about democratic values while propping up authoritarian governments that serve your strategic interests. That is not leadership. That is dominance dressed in diplomatic language. And the difference between the two matters enormously, because one builds a world worth living in, and the other simply manages a world that works for some at the expense of the rest. As a knowledge management expert, I have spent years studying how power shapes narrative, how the stories we tell about who is dangerous, who is civilized, who is responsible, and who is rogue are never neutral. They are always constructed, always serving someone's interest. And the first act of genuine intellectual leadership is learning to ask, whose interest does this narrative serve? And who is harmed by accepting it without question? That is not cynicism. That is clarity. And clarity is the beginning of every meaningful change that has ever happened in human history. If you believe the world deserves better than selective accountability, if you believe that fairness in global systems means fairness for everyone and not just the powerful, follow this page. Subscribe for more insights on knowledge and impact. Share this with someone who is ready to think beyond the headlines, and drop your perspective in the comments, because this is not a conversation with one answer. It is a conversation that needs many honest voices, including yours. This is Dr. Larry J., reminding you that the most dangerous thing in any system is not the rule breaker. It is the rule maker who exempts themselves from the rules they enforce on everyone else. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, keep demanding accountability from everyone without exception.